Okay, so I'm gonna make you listen to a piece of music. Let's see if it invokes any memories in you. For some of you who use YouTube on a regular basis, you might recognize this as meme music. A lot of people who create on YouTube often attribute this as In the Hall of the Mountain King, one of the most popular songs of the godfather of YouTube soundtrack himself, Kevin MacLeod. Except it isn't. See, this is only MacLeod's recomposition of the 1875 classical piece In the Hall of the Mountain King by Edvard Grieg. Now, why do I bring this up? It's because I love listening to movie soundtrack. And one of my favorites of all time is the soundtrack to The Social Network. This is a soundtrack I play on Spotify when I'm in the gym. From Hand Covers BRUISE to In Motion to A Familiar Taste to Intriguing Possibilities to Complication with Optimistic Outcome. The Social Network has one of the best soundtracks of all time made by these two guys, Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. However, every time I'm listening through the album, one of the tracks sticks out like a sore thumb to me. It's the one that plays over the Henley Royal Regatta. And by now, I think you would have guessed what it is. Every time I'm listening through the album, I'm left wondering why Reznor and Ross choose to include this piece of music, rather than just create a new piece of music. And I think I found the answer, going through the origin of soundtrack itself. See, back in the silent movie era, when movies were first coming onto the scene, they didn't have a soundtrack, but they did have sound. Just not the one you're listening to right now. See, people back then quickly recognized that an actually silent movie would be really awkward. And in order to fill in that silence, they would hire musicians to play live music for the audience. This was not synchronized music in any way. This was mostly atmospheric music, along the lines of ragtag music that was coming along in the United States at that time. And I think you can see the problem here. If every musical performance was live and uncoordinated, there was a lot of room for unwanted variance in music. Not only from performance to performance, but musician to musician too. Two different musicians could play two very different pieces of music, completely changing the meaning of a scene. The higher-end theaters soon turned to complete orchestras that could, instead of playing ragtag, play classical music and maintain uniformity in music. Soon the musicians were playing certain pieces dedicated to certain scenes. These pieces were not bound by any movie in particular. If 5 different movies had a scene with airplanes, all 5 of them would play Rondo Capriccioso by Mendelssohn. Not so long after, musical choices were standardized by Erno Rappe in his 1924 book Motion Picture Moods. This was the beginning of what would later become soundtrack. But back then, musicians across the US relied on Rappe to standardize their options for them, based on public perception of what a scene should sound like. If you had a battle scene, Rappe suggested Presto Agitato by Beethoven. For firefighting, Hurry No. 2 by Otto Langley. For a feeling of sadness, you would play Prelude No. 4 by Chopin. And if you had a boat stuck in a storm, can you guess what Rappe suggested? By the late 1920s, this piece was so associated with boats on sea that you could essentially name it Peril on Water. The brilliance of Reznor and Ross isn't in just paying homage to Rappe's standardization of classical music that eventually became soundtrack, but also how they use it. At this point, the Winklevoss twins and Divya have had their idea stolen by Mark Zuckerberg,
Just wanted to let you know that Zuckerberg stole our website.
lost their appeal with Harvard, and are feeling more isolated than ever, and are starting to lose at their one last distinguishing factor: rowing. all the while feeling a sense of isolation that the director David Fincher exaggerates by using tilt-shift photography and shallow depth of focus to make them feel more isolated to everyone around them. In the Hall of the Mountain King has a very descent into madness quality to it. Maybe because Grieg actually made it as a parody to ridicule the dramatic symphonies of that time, which is why it fits so perfectly here, to externalize their inner feelings for the audience. This is their last straw that eventually leads them to take legal action against Mark Zuckerberg. The music itself starts at the first sight of water and boats and ends with their last frame, but it also represents change in character emotion. The twins and Divya, who started out as optimistic at the start of the movie, are bitter and revengeful by the end of this piece of music.
Let's gut the freaking nerd.
This scene is a perfect example of practical use of your craft while knowing your history. It shows how Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross brilliantly adapt music, not only as homage, but also in service of the story, adapting a 90-year-old musical suggestion for both Stuck on Water as a metaphor for the internal emotional storm that the characters are facing.
It's been alive for more than 36 hours.
Showing us how even after 90 years, art can be adapted in new ways to benefit your story, and why it is so important to know your history and build on it. Hey, thanks for watching guys. Be sure to like, share, subscribe and leave a comment if there's any other movie you want to see a video on. See you in the next one.